Okay, I'd like to thank everyone for coming. Appreciate the fact you turned up to see us. And introduce to you Mark and Nicola Palios. I think the best way for us to start is actually just to go straight into a Q&A, and there'll be a chance to branch out, to break out for some one-on-ones afterwards. So, Nick, would you like to start?
Sure. Mark, Nicola, when did you first decide to have a go at this, and why?
It was about 3 or 4 months ago, driving back from France. Well, actually, it was the last game of the last season. We were listening to it on the radio, driving back from France, and Mark was understandably gutted in the last few minutes when they got relegated, and that started a conversation about, well, if we were ever going to try and get involved and help the club, then now's the time to do it. So
I think it's fair to say that, the problems off the field last season just added to the problems on the field, and my real concern is that the club would go straight through Div 2 and into the conference, and it's a long way back despite the support of Peter. So we picked up the phone. I mean, Nicky persuaded me to do it because clearly it's not something that you would necessarily think to be doing, even with my background. And I owe the club a lot. The club was, as you know, Nick, the club was something that was a big part of my life in the early years, set me on my way, and if I can give something back, then that's, now's the time to do it. And when Peter spoke to us about it, and we started to work with him over the summer, we eventually came to a solution that enabled us to say, yes, we'll take this forward. And so whilst it's an emotional decision that started it, there's a genuine belief that if any club can become a self-sustainable club in the lower divisions, then this is one that can.
Most football clubs in the lower divisions do lose money, and this one's been no different. Do you think you can make things happen differently here?
It's it may be arrogant to think that we can, and I think that everybody knows with a football club, unlike most other businesses, and I've looked at any businesses you can care to mention, any type of business, any industry you like, this is one whereby the art form conflicts with the economics, and you can make it what you like. You can make as big a loss as you want to make. The answer is, can you get to a point whereby, can you see in a club something that has, without giving you a non-footballing term, a sustainable competitive advantage? In other words, it has something that other people don't have, and therefore you should be successful if you just perform averagely. And if I look at this club and I look at other clubs in Division 2 and indeed in Division 1, this club has so many advantages, so much potential compared to those other clubs. It's in a conurbation of 300,000 people on this side of the Mersey, and I think there are very few Nickies from Newcastle, but there are very few other conurbations that have the soccer mad aspect to it of life that this club has. As a consequence, we're not boring you with too much business speak. If you're looking for a business model down the lower leagues, you're either going to have a benefactor model or you're going to have a self-sustainable model. And the benefactor model will be fine as long as you can find an Arab sheikh, but will they come down the lower leagues? No. And as long as the person has enough cash, and as long as the person doesn't fall out of love with football generally because of the hassle he gets from the fans. So that's, Peter's been a great supporter of the club, and he's put a lot of cash into it. And as part of the deal, he's written off all of his loans, basically. And that's not insignificant. But he's given the club some of its best years. So the model worked for the club for a number of years. What we're looking at here is leveraging off two principal things. One is that you only have to look at the England squad. You may say that's a bad example, but there's lots of Merseyside elements around the England squad. This place will develop players, I can tell you that. And it should develop players, notwithstanding EPPP. We recognise the problems with that. And that's what we will seek to do. And we've got ideas around that as to how we can make that work. The second thing is, this is a community club, and it's a working class club. And I wasn't a great player here, but they actually liked me because I actually worked hard for the 90 minutes. So they have those ethics, and it can be the heart of the community. And I realise, and I didn't mean to when I said it, this is more than a football club, but I was plagiarising some other big clubs' outline. And we're not a Barcelona, but actually the club can be more than a club for a whole variety of reasons. There's lots of things in terms of the potential that we saw here we think we can unearth. And examples, women's football, How about futsal? This is a centre of futsal. If we're developing good players, etc., we have a manager who wants to play football properly. Understanding you've got to be pragmatic in the in Div 2. But the second thing, also on top of that, is apart from our backgrounds, which involve sport and commerce, most clubs have a difficulty, and most between the boardroom and the boot room. And because I've spent a lot of time in the boot room, I can have conversations with the manager. So I understand Saturday. I understand the disappointment of the fans when they see the team not play the way they played in a pre-season friendly. But I also understand that in a pre-season friendly, your teammate will take the extra 5 yards so you can give him the ball. Whereas on the first day of the season, he might just stay a little bit the wrong side and you can't get the pass away. And that's about showing your team badge, not your number. And I understand those issues. So I think that in terms of accountability, which in most businesses you don't have it in football. They've tried it with a football director, but in this particular case, I can have a very tight conversation, which I've just had, with the manager. And I think that's an aspect that you don't actually see in a lot of other football clubs. So the guts of it is that we think we can leverage the potential around this through a combination of knowledge of sport, knowledge of business, and just an awareness to doing things differently.
Has this club been tugging at your heartstrings for the last 40 years?
That's my pacemaker. Somebody's out of battery here. Listen, you don't play for a club for 13 years and then just sort of walk away from it. So I always
yes, it's close to his heart.
Yeah, and it gave me a lot. It gave me a lot of things that that I got out of life was from being here as a teenager, age 16, and actually playing for the club. And to watch it from a distance is one thing. I didn't spend my life wanting to come back to the club and do what we're doing at the club now. I just didn't do that. It wasn't on our agenda at all. But you always had an eye. I remember about a couple of years after I'd left, because I got them into the position, they nearly went down out of the league, and Johnny King was searching around to find me to come and play. They were so desperate for players because they were, they had amateurs who were playing and people playing with injections in the knee. And I independently came up to the Exeter match that day from Cambridge, popped my head in the dressing room, and they said, "Where have you been?" And I said, "Well, down in Cambridge." And but the irony was that I was offered a 2-year contract by Exeter 2 years previously, so that would have been my last game for Exeter, and I doubt whether I'd have scored if I'd gone through, but who knows. But no, it's a massive emotional tie for me, but I won't let that disturb what we think is necessary, is to adopt some business principles to the club. And and we need to leverage the good potential that's around the place, both outside the club and inside the club. Unexciting to fans, possibly, but the reality is we will spend the next 6 months certainly on the road, working full-time in the club to try and develop some of those ideas and partnerships that we have to develop with major clubs, with Sport England, UK Sport, all the people who are around who are major players in what we see as going forwards.
So the contacts you've made in football, you're going to try and use to help?
Yeah, and we can open doors, we can at least have a conversation with people that may be more difficult to achieve, and at times it's useful just to get to the right people and to understand what motivates them and what their agendas are, and that may enable us to sort of leverage up more funding around issues and to develop things like the academy. So we would debate it. The club was debating whether the academy went from a category 3 to a category 4. Well, my sights are completely in the other direction, and that again lifts the guys who are in the academy, because they're suddenly saying, well, actually we are fundamentally at the heart of the club. Sorry, I've gone on too much, but
Everyone okay?
Yeah. The fans, Mark, how big a role will the fans play in this strategy that you've got? Did you sit down and talk to them? Especially there's a supporters group that were looking to buy the club before you did that.
do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't met with the Supporters Trust yet, but it's absolutely top of our agenda to do that, because they're clearly a committed group of people who have the interests of the club at heart, and we would like to be able to work with them going forward. We are planning to meet up with the fans and give them the opportunity to ask us their questions directly, and we will answer them as best we can. I think you know, it's quite important. I think Jeremy made some enormous strides since he's been in the club to sort of open up communication and try and be a bit more open about what we're doing. So we're very happy to do that, and we're keen to meet the plans and explain to them what we're trying to do, and also to set expectations for them, because, you know, there's obviously quite a lot of publicity around this, and we need to get that balance right between getting people excited and getting them enthusiastic and behind us, but not setting wild expectations that, you know, everything's suddenly going to be sorted out overnight. The most important thing is to make sure that this club has absolutely rock solid foundations to build on for the future, so it's got a long-term, sustainable, solid future. It's not about bung a lot of short-term money and short-term fixes in for a season and then, you know, see it all come crashing down again.
So stabilisation is this.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and you know, I sort of wrote the book on turnaround with all due respect in the city, and stabilisation is the first phase of any turnaround, and you know, this is a turnaround, hopefully. I think the issue with the fans is that, as Nicky says, we've got to get the balance between setting expectations and ambition, because ambition is the lifeblood of the game. And you know, I remember going to a game at the start of maybe 3-4 seasons ago. I saw Chelsea play at West Ham, and I was there at the guest of some of the West Ham fans, and the conversation was atrocious. It was, you know, oh well, let's get this game out of the way, then our season starts. They were expecting to be beaten, and the team expected to be beaten, and they scored, I think, within 2 minutes, and it was 2-0, and it was, and so it went on. And then I thought, how sad is that? You know, you've got a position there whereby ambition has been killed. There's been lots of things said about the club in terms of loan players, and one of the things I'm quite keen on is developing a proper relationship with clubs that will have a proper relationship with us. And you know, already my phone's been red hot with people who actually want to help. And push comes to shove when they have to put their hand in the pocket. But the relationship with the bigger clubs is sometimes uncomfortable, and the fans, we've got to manage the expectation of the fans. And yes, loan players will play a part in this, but we've got the dynamic of the team, and I always like in a team if somebody comes in and is from a bigger club, etc., and has paid more cash and so forth and so on. So there's that dynamic to manage, but with the fans in particular, you know, I can see one of the ways forward, and it isn't the only way forward, is that we develop relationships with some of the bigger clubs. And you know, do some of the bigger clubs want a footprint on a hotbed that is Merseyside? You bet they do. You know, and for the first time, I think it's this August, I think I'm right in saying that to some of the Premier League clubs can now go and fish in other people's ponds. Now, if they want to come and fish in the pond, then we want to be in a position whereby we're first there, and we actually have, well, I mean, where do you want to go? Do you want to go to, I don't know, I'm not going to demean other connotations, but I wouldn't mind having a footprint on Merseyside.
Can I just say one other thing on the subject of fans? Because as a relative newcomer to Tranmere, obviously, you know, Mark's got a very long history with the club. I've been really impressed by the loyalty of the fans. It was quite heartwarming on Saturday to see the biggest opening day gate for quite some time, for a number of years, despite the fact that the club's been relegated. And I think, you know, that's a really positive sign about, you know, the willingness of the fans to stick with this club and show its support. So, I mean, that's a great foundation to build on.
In your career as a sort of a business turnaround consultant, have you come across a sort of set of circumstances quite like the ones here?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I actually get all the difficult jobs. You know, I've said it many times. One of my specialisms actually in the firm was where the art form conflicted with the economics. So it's things I happen to do, although I'm a working class lad, I happen to do things like the Opera House and the Kirov Ballet, and there's another local opera house that was also had a problem. And it's not just in sort of in places like that, but it's where, you know, you have this art form and it's separate to business, as it were, and so you've got to marry the two. I think football clubs are particularly difficult because you've then got the expectation of the fans. I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but you talked about the fans. It's a massive issue because I've always said one of the big passions about football, one of the big benefits of football is the passion that people have and the interest that they have. And with the benefit comes the burden, because, you know, and they have opinions, and they should have opinions. And sometimes the opinions are uninformed. Sometimes you can't have enough time to go and talk to them as to what you're trying to do, etc. And that's the real difficulty that causes people problems. You know, you see it on Saturday, you know, and you see some of the fans were having to go at some of the players, and you know, however I might think that's unfortunate, and you know, but you know, they pay the money, it comes out of hard-earned wages, and they have the right to say what they want to say. So you've got to balance that, and I don't think there's a business that I've come across, and I've worked in every industry you can think of, and even where the art form conflicts, that compares with football because of the passionate beliefs it's held. So when people say to me, you've got a lack of ambition in terms of saying, well, I want to make sure we secure Div 2 status, at least, it is because there's so many variables in a football club. You know, we've got an injury to our captain on Saturday, that you can't actually say you're going to guarantee it, unless you're going to throw cash that we haven't got at the problem. So the answer is, it's steady as you go at the moment, and we will build, and hopefully over the period of the next 6 months to a year, we'll be able to say something about more detail about the plans, and the idea of having the plans that we will talk about is we will have gone out and researched behind the scenes with people and developed those ideas, the winners, and then on the basis of that you can then perhaps attract second phase funding to take the, but to go out today is a fatuous exercise. I'd be embarrassed to go out and say, can you back us to do this, because at the moment talk's cheap. So we have the breathing space. We've got to get the fans to understand it's a breathing space, and we funded it for 2 years.
In the past, people have often said this club's too much in the shadow of Liverpool and Everton, and Liverpool and Everton are always going to take away quite a lot of the fan base here. Is there a way to address that?
Yeah, and there's not a quick fix to it. I understand that. We understand that. I think that one of the key things in terms of fixing businesses is having an appreciation of the timing of things. And so for me, what I was going on to say, and I'm terrible because I wandered off, I was going on to say that you can never lose the ambition of the club. So even if we develop a relationship with a Liverpool or an Everton or a Chelsea or an Arsenal or a Man City, you will never really surrender that relationship, that ambition of the club on the basis of we'll have that relationship. So, but in the short term, you might say that's the right thing to do. You're a feeder club in the short term. So it's having that perspective. And that within that perspective, I think some of the things we want to talk about doing, making this a proper community club, start to develop. But people say to me, when I was at the FA, you said, oh, why are you investing in women's football? And it'll never be like the Premier League. And I said, with respect, you've missed the point. It isn't about it being a competitor to the Premier League, the men's Premier League. It's about having women who have played the game, who understand the game, understand the benefits you get from playing on a team game, and will take their children to matches, and actually will then also make their kids actually play football as well, and because that's one of the difficulties. They've got to drive them to and from games or pay the money for the bus or whatever. That's my era. I know kids get lifts now. And so that is, if you like, the medium-term strategy to gradually develop that. There are other issues, like Wirral Council being a great supporter of this club. I know that the council are currently strapped for cash, but there are things that you can do, and if you can combine that with cash from the outside to develop things, you know, so if you're looking at our new training ground at Solar Campus, is there more that we can do with that helps the community? And you know, as I say, talk's cheap, but at the moment, that's where you're coming from, that you really put some effort and energy into these projects. You prioritise the ones that you're going to do, and you know, you then leverage off the fact that this club can be more than a club. It can be a sporting hub, and that's something 10 years ago I spoke to Gordon Brown about, that actually if you wanted to attract kids into, if their social agenda was about inclusion, was about health and fitness in terms of so getting involved in sport, and football was going to be used as the magnet. So you know, I said, look, the idea it took to him was to develop 50, basically like pits or five-a-side, small-sided game centres, and then you spin off that with other sports that they can get kids into and so forth. It isn't just the football, but that's the thing that attracts them and so forth. So there's ideas around that, the variants of that need a lot of horsepower. The club, with all due respect to Jeremy, you know, with the amount of resource it has in place, you know, he could only really just manage the day-to-day affairs of running a football club. So we needed extra. It's not just the contacts; it's the time, physical time, to go out and develop those particular projects that we think are important, and you know, to pick the ones that win and drop the ones that don't.